Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Welcome to episode 259 of Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. I'm Marcy Larson, Andy's mom. Today we are honoring the 5-year anniversary of the podcast. I really can't even believe it has been 5 years, but over those 5 years, we've gone through a lot. And this is a live stream recording of what we talked about. I had Gwen on as well as 4 previous guests, Stephanie from episode 2, Chrisy from episode 19, Nan from episode 23, and finally Demi from episode 92. Now, you might think that if you haven't listened to these episodes or you're not a longtime listener, you won't get a lot out of it, but I think that is completely untrue. In fact, after we stopped recording, Gwen said, I never tell you what to say at the beginning or what to write, but tell people that early grievers will find this really helpful. And she was very, very right. So if you are early in your grief, or if you know someone who is early in their grief, share this episode with them, because I do think that it will offer so much hope for the future and hope that there is healing in this journey. And even though we will never look the same, there can still be so much beauty that can come out of our grief journey. I do also want to take a minute to apologize for some of the sound quality. So, especially as we get a little later, some people cut out. There is some sort of weird breathing that's maybe a pet, I'm not sure, for about 5 minutes. I tried to take as much out of that as I could, tried to make it sound as good as I could, but it's difficult when you have 6 people in, so just give me grace for that. But I did want to make sure that everyone was heard, and I didn't cut all of that out, because even with the breathing, there were some really good things that were said that I didn't want to lose. Right now, just enjoy listening to the 6 of us have this wonderful talk. Okay, I'm here with Gwen to get us started. So as you may know, to some of the listeners that are coming on, we're going to have different people come on and talk and kind of interview, bring people in one at a time. But welcome, Gwen. You get to start.
Thank you. This is so surreal because I feel like we've been doing this forever, but yet it feels like just yesterday. I cannot believe it's been 5 years. But then I started thinking that's what grief is like, right? Like you feel like you can't remember a time you weren't doing it, but yet it feels like it was just yesterday. So it makes sense that I would feel that way today.
Well, and we started this podcast when you and I recorded. It's probably about 5 years to the day of this one, because I just listened to the episode that I did with you. And it was a couple weeks after the anniversary, the first anniversary of Andy's death. Anyway, it was just interesting kind of to listen to myself then and to think of all that we've gone through since that, because that was our very first one. We've done so many since. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is. We were sitting in your dining room and we were together. And now with technology and the different things, we're never in the same room. But
we never are in the same room.
Yeah.
But you're right. For a long time, you came over, didn't you? Yeah. And we was welcome.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was right in the dining room always. And I'd have to remember to turn off the clock, my Andy clocks. The Andy clock go off in the middle.
I was just going to say that.
I had forgotten about that altogether. Anyway, I wanted to start out by doing a few different things. So you will notice when we interview some people, we talk a little bit about the support groups. So in the very first episode that you and I did, Gwen, we talked a lot about Starlight support groups and the importance of that and what those Starlight groups meant to me. Because at the time, you work for Starlight, which you don't anymore, but you were talking about the groups and getting involved in groups and how beneficial they are. And it's really funny because now 5 years later, I'm not a participant in a group, but I do the virtual support groups. And I want to bring that up right now because we are starting up again really soon. So we're starting on September 10th is the first one. We have morning support groups. We have evening support groups. They're virtual. I am in both of them. They are both free of charge. They are faith-based. Stephanie will talk more on this, I'm sure. But certainly feel free to reach out to Starlight and join one of those support groups and become a little closer knit part of this community if you want to, because I just think it's an amazing thing that can be done. And I don't know, just re-listening to those old episodes brought a lot of that back for me.
Imagine if I had told you on that first episode, hey, talking about Starlight, you're going to be leading a group. You'd probably no, not me. And so
4 years from now, you're doing that. No, I wouldn't have thought that would be possible at all.
Yeah.
I also want to take a second to thank you because you did an interview with Eric and I when we were talking about the beginning of the anniversary, and it was the anniversary of Andy's death, and we were talking about the 5-year anniversary of the podcast, and you said, thank you for not doing ads, thank you for doing the podcast, and encourage people to do a donation to say thank you. And I thank you for that because I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lovely donations, and I want to just mention those people by first name and who they were honoring. So I'm going to take a quick minute to do that. So I had a donation from Cindy for helping in the grief of Brett. Also Elizabeth, who made her donation just quietly, she said. And then the next one was Dana in honor of Brogan. And we had Marilyn in honor of Chandler. Zoe said she made it in honor of my Andy. And then Laura had a donation in honor of Luke. So I want to thank all of those people who gave donations. And I just do appreciate it so much. All right. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you a little bit. Go ahead, Gwen.
No, what I was going to say is that people listening might say, well, that's for those other people when we talk about how we've changed and grown, and they don't see that they too someday will see growth and change and be doing things they never imagined.
I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that being said, I want to bring Stephanie in now. And I think that's a good thing because that's the one thing that I really wanted to talk to Stephanie about today. So I'm going to add her to the stage now. And you know Stephanie well.
I do.
So welcome, Stephanie.
Hello.
Keyan's mom, Stephanie. You were my first guest other than Gwen. So you were episode number 3. And we sat in your kitchen just off from the room where Keyan lived. And it's the only time I've been in your kitchen, actually. But it was such an amazing time, I thought. And you had a chance to listen to your episode. So I want you to give some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I did. I listened to it this afternoon. And it's funny that you say that. I did not remember that we did that in my kitchen. I had no recollection of that. So thanks for that memory. And we did. And now that you say that, we sat right outside Keyan's room where she lived and where she died. I listened to the podcast this afternoon, and it was really interesting. It's been, obviously been 5 years.
Yeah.
So for me, I was only 2 years out, a little more than 2 years out, and now am more than 7. It's going to sound crazy, but a little bit of me today longed for year 2. That I was starting year 3. I had just had year 2. And that sounds a little crazy, probably because no one really wants to relive year 2 or 1 or 2. But the fact of the matter is, back then, it was more acute, which was harder. Grief was more acute and it was harder. But it was also other people understood why I was sad, why I was doing what I was doing. 7 years out, people, I get more of the, oh, you're still feeling that way? Or I get the, oh, you're not over that yet? Those, some of those hard comments. And so for a few moments today, I just took some time to lament and be grateful, right? Lament, the acuteness that people understand better, and be grateful for where we're at now. So,
well, and I found that too, because I listened to all three of the first ones, the first one with Eric, the first one with Gwen, and the first one with you. And I found myself telling stories of Andy that I had kind of forgotten. And it made me a little bit sad too, that like, wow, I shared that with Stephanie and I didn't even remember that anymore. And then you think, what else have I forgotten? And so that was a little bit tougher to take too.
Yeah,
but I think that this was almost like a little diary for me in some ways, like hearing my voice week after week and how things changed throughout that time.
Sure. That makes sense.
There were two things that really, really hit me when listening to yours again. The first one, I'm going to go into a little bit later, but the first one was when you shared that you felt like your low moment in your grief was at 18 months. And that at 18 months, you found yourself on the bathroom floor, just kind of wishing you weren't there anymore.
Yep. I was looking for a way out. Yep.
Looking for a way out. At the time, of course, I was not there. I was right at a year. I feel like I was so excited to kind of be starting the podcast and getting a little bit of purpose and all of that I seemed kind of stronger. And yet when I listen later on, which we're going to get to this later because it's when I interviewed Nan, I was at that 18-month point. And I was at that point where I feel like I hit my low. So it was interesting to hear you talk about that and then to hear myself when I was at that same point.
Yeah, I talk a lot about that 18-month mark, mostly because I really want to bring awareness to the fact that for me, it wasn't in that first 6 months. It wasn't in that first year. It was past that. And that kind of, I don't think people understand that it can be that far out. And so I talk a lot about that and I share a lot about that. Thankfully, I am still here and I have a great support system, but that isn't the case for others. And so I always tell people, like, don't stop reaching out after 1 year. Keep reaching out because this is a lifelong journey for us bereaved parents.
And I felt like the other point that I listened to was at that time in your life, you were really, really struggling to find purpose. And you said that, like, I don't know what my purpose is anymore. I'm not sure what my purpose. And someone told me someday at some point, you're going to find your purpose and Keyan will be all wrapped up in it. And I felt like, oh my word, that's kind of what happened. So I would like you to go into that a little bit. And Gwen knows this too.
Well, yeah, I just got really choked up because I remember when I met Stephanie and she knows I've told her this, like God just spoke to me and said, she's going to do this. Like, this is part of her story. And I'm getting all teary because I was right there. I remember.
And I remember my very, very first support group that I was at, we're in this huge circle of parents, of moms and dads. And I felt so drawn to you, Stephanie. One, that you were almost exactly a year further out than me, in 13 months. But, your Keyan, even though she had died of such different circumstances, she had long chronic illness, and my Andy was, pretty healthy kid. But they were both very similar ages. And I just felt myself really looking to you and admiring you and felt drawn to you very, very beginning. And but I didn't know, obviously, that we would go on to have a pretty long-term relationship. And I sort of, well, you go on and talk about what you've done, what you are doing now, and how Keyan's up in it.
Yeah, on the podcast, when I re-listened to it, I had just started teaching very, very part-time. And I did that very purposely. I needed something else for my brain to spin on besides grief. I took 2 years and I was the CEO of mourning. And then I was like, okay, I've got to have something else. And I looked at a few things and that teaching very, very part-time fell into place. And I did that. I did that for 2 years or a year and a half. And I felt like it was wonderful and it was my purpose. And I remember standing in the hallway of the high school where I was teaching and tears streaming down my face and being so grateful that God had brought me to that spot at that moment in time. I was also in a season of saying yes. It was really something that I was working through like just say yes until the doors close. And so I was teaching. I was loving it. I was loving my students. I had tons of freedom to teach how I wanted to. And then COVID happened, and I was not loving it as much for a lot of reasons. I thought it was just COVID at the time. And at that same time, we didn't have our contracts yet. It was October, and we didn't have our contracts, which was odd. We should have had our contracts, when we started the school year. But it was COVID and, all the things. So we were just kind of making do. And I got this phone call in September or October from Gwen, and who was working at Starlight. I had recently, a couple months before, I had been at Starlight at an event, and somebody said, we really need facilitators. And I was like, oh yeah, someday, that's my plan. I'll give back in that way, but I'm not ready yet. Anyways, Gwen called and explained to me that she was looking to kind of do something different and start her own fantastic business, and wondered if I might come in and talk to her about working at Starlight. And I know right where I was sitting for that phone call. I remember reminding myself that I was in a season of saying yes. And I did. And so I went in and I met with Gwen, and I met with Executive Director Jolynn. I think they had no idea. Like, they just knew me as this grieving mom. They had no idea that I had teaching experience. They had no idea that I was a social worker. Like, they didn't really know. Like, Gwen was totally leading or following the spirit, right? And Jolynn was just sort of like, yeah, let's talk to this lady. And I remember sitting in this little
as social worker. I don't know any part of the story, actually.
Yeah, no, they really didn't know much, really. And we sat there, and then in the end, I kind of said, look, here's the deal. I would love to give this a try, but I know my contract's coming anytime. And so if we're going to do this, we kind of have to do it because I don't want to back out of my contract. And so October of 2020, I started and then kind of shadowing Gwen. And then in January of 2021, I officially was the director of programming. And I just recently got a new title at Starlight, the director of programming and education. Yeah, I definitely have the woman that told me that you're speaking of, Marcy, that I was so distraught over the fact that God had given me these strengths, and all those strengths led me to Keyan. That's how I felt. Like, all I saw when I looked at that list of strengths in front of me that day were Keyan. It was just, I was supposed to be taking care of Keyan, and she wasn't here. And now I can say that those strengths are exactly what makes me be able to do my job at Starlight. I love, love, love my job. Mm-hmm. I love every day that Keyan is with me. She goes to work with me every day. I get to share her. I get to share my experiences. I get to shine hope into other people. And I get to still gain hope from other people because I'm surrounded by, a group of people who get what grieving and mourning is, or who are grieving and mourning. And so it is nothing. It was never on my radar to be to even be working that much. I mean, I work 32 hours. That was never my plan. I had been a stay-at-home mom for 17 years. And so I was just going to do a little bit here and there. My 32 hours most often ends up being 45 hours because I love it and I just can't turn my computer off. And so, yeah, it's been amazing. Starlight has experienced tremendous growth since COVID. I think that's one of the beautiful things of COVID, is that it has opened up discussion about death and dying and grieving and bereavement. And I think it has also opened up that we can talk about this and we should get support. And so, like you were saying, that's what we do. And we do support groups and we do all sorts of other things. And I just get to be blessed by it. And it's amazing.
Yeah. Shortly after you started, you, of course, did a virtual support group because we're doing virtual support groups during COVID. There were only like 4 or 5 and that you were facilitating it. I was a member. And then, we're going to go back to in-person groups in that fall of 2021. And that's when I said to you, I have met so many people, so many moms, especially who don't have something like Starlight. What would you think if we kept going with virtual? And I facilitated instead. And you were all over that. And now
I mean, what started out as that little group of 4 or 5 people online during COVID has now become, I mean, we're at 20, 25 plus through the 2 groups.
Yep.
And anyway, I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited to keep going with it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, that's another thing that Starlight learned through COVID was, yes, we wanted to be in person, and we were back in person as soon as we could be. But we also learned that there was a need. Not only like literally internationally, we have international people that join us now, but even some of our own local people who maybe don't drive at night, or who just, maybe their loved one died in a car accident and they're just not driving, period, And so it has been really amazing. And I will give a little teaser that our virtual offerings will hopefully be expanding come January, because we know that it's not just bereaved parents that need a virtual group. And so we're excited about that.
All right. Well, I'm going to put you back out for a little bit and go ahead and bring in Chrisy. So here we go. Welcome, Chrisy. Thanks for being patient.
Of course.
So Chrisy, now we're going to jump ahead a little bit. Chrisy was episode number 19. Chrisy is on today because Chrisy was actually my very first Apple review. You gave me my first review because it's only a little bit after Caleb had died that you started listening. And I remember because we just released those 3 right away, and I was going to kind of start keeping on going, and I didn't know. We were kind of trying it out. Let's see what happens. And I get your review. You said, I just listened to the episode of you and Gwen, and I was able to get up this morning.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to Eric, we need to keep going. Because if one person can get up out of bed, wasn't able to do that before, then it's worth it. And at that point in time, really, honestly, in my mind, I made the decision to keep going, and I kept going for you, and I'd never even met you.
Oh,
Right? It was for that one podcast. I never had a conversation. I'd never gotten an email. I read that one little blurb on iTunes, and that kept me going. And then you did email, and then I said, hey, if you ever want to come on, I'd love to have you on, but no pressure.
right.
And then you came on.
I did.
I was going to say that having a face to that story, because I've had that in my head and know that that's what we're doing, the reason why, and just seeing your face just is awesome. I've never met you either.
Yes, I know. Yes, it was probably about 3 weeks after Caleb died, and I Googled encouraging podcast for child loss, and it came up, and I listened to the first and the second episode, and then the third one came out, and I remember I believe it was a Saturday morning, and I just couldn't get out of bed, and I listened to the episode, and I was like, I have to tell her how important this was to me, because for the first time since he died, I felt less alone. I felt like there's someone out there in this world, in this country, that knows exactly how I feel. And you were speaking like straight to my heart, and like just filling me up with, this is possible. This is possible. If only you just take one more breath, take one more step, it's possible. And so you were my guiding light, being, just about exactly a year, just about.
Yeah.
Was
I mean, almost on the nose. I think that was part of what drew you to me too, is that Andy's, anniversary of Andy's death was on the 15th of August, and Caleb died on the 12th. So yep. Caleb died 3 days before my first anniversary. So it was like she was walking my path just a year later.
Yeah.
And I think that was helpful to you in some ways.
It very much so was, because I didn't have anybody in my local, that I knew in my sphere of influence, or anybody that was walking a journey of child loss that I could relate to here. And so finding you and just being able to kind of step in your footsteps, it just helped me. It helped me survive. It gave me hope. It gave me possibility. And honestly, your podcast, you and your podcast, and just our friendship and our boys are why I'm still here today. and why I am doing well, and why I'm able to take one step after the other, day in and day out.
Well, and you came on and you did not remember this. It's so funny because I said to everyone, if you can listen to your episode before coming on, that would be great. And you couldn't, which is totally fine. Like, it's totally fine because I told you I can't always either. And Gwen said, don't worry about it. A lot of people can't. Like, I'm on other people's podcasts and I don't. And I listened to my own today, the first one with Eric, and I stopped the whole way through. So because I've never wanted to listen to it again, and I never have. This is the first time I listened to it was today, about 2 hours ago. So don't feel bad that you did not listen. But so much has happened since then because there was that. You came on the podcast. You've been on other podcasts. Yeah. You started an organization in Caleb's name. You started coming to the support groups that we just kind of promoted. So again, join the support group, get to know us, get to be a part of the family. But anyway, talk a little bit about what you've done since in the past 5 years, because you're 5 years out now.
Yes, I am. And that's, again, like, it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it does feel like 5 years or more, sometimes too. I have grown and changed over these last 5 years. And I really have seen the good that God tells us he's going to show us. I really have seen it over these last 5 years. And I never thought I would ever say that because Caleb dying was not good. But I had to learn that God doesn't think that's good either. But he brought good out of it. And I have started an organization. Caleb was very active in our community and in community service. And he just loved people and he loved kids. He loved being involved in things, went on mission trip and volunteered locally quite often. And so I was just really sad that he could no longer provide that kind of love and care to our community. So I said, I'm going to do it for you and I'm going to do it in your name. And so I started nonprofit, the Caleb Cares Project, and we just do, I like to call it random acts of kindness in our community. We do lots of things like we give scholarships for kids to play sports whose parents might not be able to afford for them to play. Or just today, I dropped off my entire car was full of pull-ups and wipes and socks and underwear that I dropped off to Head Start, which is free preschool for, low income, no income families. And they have 8 classrooms that they'll divvy up all those supplies into. And I do it in honor of my son because he loved people and I get to still say his name and I get to love on people and bring a smile to their face and help meet their needs and give them, a gift card for groceries or buy them a bus pass. And I get to do it all, in memory of Caleb. I have also, I started a blog the same year, so like 2020. And I shared my grief journey very openly and honestly and raw because I just wanted people to know what I was experiencing. And I wanted them to know what this journey looks like, it feels like.
Yeah, and it's messy, right?
It's so messy and it's complicated and it's confusing and it's painful. But also, how can we see the beauty in that as well? So I've enjoyed writing, even if only for myself. I've enjoyed doing that. And it's opened up some avenues for me to be able to write things for other people. And I've written a couple devotions for a devotional book, and I've written a chapter for a book that's about to come out. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you and for the Lord who's walked with me and helped me sit up straight in this chair today.
Well, thank you, Chrisy. And with that, I'm going to kind of put you out in the waiting room and bring in Nan. So here we go. Welcome, Nan. This is Nan.
Hi, Marcy. How are you?
I am doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Gwen.
Hi.
So you came as a request from actually Carolyn. So Carolyn oftentimes is listening on the live stream, so I hope she's listening today. And it was her idea that she wanted to get some updates from people and see how they are doing today. And the very first person she mentioned was you. So
thank you so much for accepting that invitation to be able to come on. But what I alluded to earlier about that 18-month mark, I just wanted to bring up, because if you listen to your episode, which you did and I did, I did so much emotion in me personally. And I realized as we were talking, that we were talking in February, and we were talking within days of that 18-month mark for me. And that honestly was about as low as I got in that. And just, I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you just listened. So you just heard how emotional I was and how strong you seemed. But I just was hurting a lot more than I think I even realized at that point and during that interview. And I know we talked to, after I asked you to be on, that things weren't exactly as they seemed with you either. Really.
Right. Well, let me just say, when I listened to myself, the first half, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that lady. And then the second half, I'm like, wait a minute, I need to look at the date. I need to look at the date when I did the podcast, because COVID is when I hit bottom.
And this was at a month before COVID hit.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm on February of 2020.
Yes.
And I've done podcasts since then, being very open and honest with my journey. And obviously not for you in the self-care area. I will say this, but let me tell you some things that have changed, that when I was listening, I'm like, oh, I mean, my son got married.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This week, they're about to have my first grandbaby.
Oh, very exciting.
Sorry,
you said you will probably be on, but if she goes into labor, you're out.
Peace out. Yeah. I mean, I've got my phone here, so if I get a text, bye. So excited. A little boy. My youngest son, 6 years to get through college, but he did it. Okay. And he was just graduating high school. The golden retriever that I talked about in my Norman Rockwell painting, we had her 16 years, 14 of which, because Connor found her, she was my therapy dog. And she's been gone a couple of years. Indiana, she held me together. We did go back to the Grand Canyon. I did take Connor. We walked that same trail, and I wore my, I would walk across Legos t-shirt, and I did do it. And so, there's just different things as I listen to myself going, how I'm almost 16 years in, and I myself at 18 months, as I was listening, I wanted to take my life and tried. And I remember in the podcast saying, and out of nowhere, this grieving mom came into my life. Well, it wasn't out of nowhere. It was the Lord. That's where it changes. As I listened to the beginning of the podcast and recollecting who my son was and how my grief journey was in the days of death, and the things that I've had to do to journey on this marathon, all of those are true. And yet I did not tether myself to the Lord. I was so angry with him and had so much doubt. And as I listened to the second half of the podcast, personally, me going, oh man, I kept saying, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. And I was taking matters into my own hands to defend the pain inflicted on my life that I thought was not fair. And so, all of the, and I want to caveat this. I've been praying about this so much since you and I talked. I believe in counseling. I believe in EMDR. I believe in medication for things. I believe in if you need depressive medication or anxiety or sleep for season. I do believe in all of those things. And yet for a decade, I abused those things, and I took things into my own hands with those substances and with alcohol. And now I'm getting night. And it was a 10-year journey of numbing. And it started out very slow. And then I hit bottom in March of 2020. And I'll have to back up. And now that I'm in recovery and I have done my work with the Lord, thank him for being there for me. This is all him. I want to give him all the glory. But I had abandonment in my childhood. I had a season of abandonment in my marriage. I'm very open and honest with this with my family, but at the time I was doing that after Connor died. And when I slowly got into this, I cannot handle this pain, and started numbing. It was gradual and went crazy. I just felt like I had found the answer to this pain. And so it took on a life of its own, honestly. The lies the enemy tells you, you're just doing it at night. You're not doing it during the day. You're not driving. You're not this. You're not that. And I literally was doing it in the closet, and my family just had no idea. And really no one knew. But with anything like that, when you're keeping prescription medication going and then you've got alcohol involved, it's not going to be a good combination. So really my depression skyrocketed, my anxiety skyrocketed, and literally in all of that I'm tracking now, the straw broke the camel's back for me with Connor, because I just felt ultimately abandoned by God. And so I just took the mantle up of, okay, I'm going to defend myself against all of this darkness, all my family of origin stuff, my marriage stuff, and now my son. And I really honestly thought, and the enemy was telling me all the time, in isolation, and then this is the way to keep this pain at bay. And it was dark. And boy, in March of 2020, everything was stripped from me because we all had to go home. And there were 3 times in 3 years prior to that, where 3 times where I tried to get off of everything, and I had so much withdrawal. And that's when the enemy swooped in and said, yeah, and you'll ruin your husband's career because he's in ministry, and you will lose your job, and on and on it was, and what a pathetic mother you are, and just the lies. And I believed all of it. And honestly, my truth with the Lord, I just put him at bay, and I was so angry because of the loss of Connor. It was like I didn't know what was truth. I knew what was Nan's truth. And boy, when I hit rock bottom that day, March 17th, 2020, and I went into my guest bedroom and got on my yoga mat because I thought, hey, I can do yoga. Everything was shut down. I couldn't even Zoom with my kindergartners, and there was nothing to do. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought, I don't know how to live with you. I went in that room, and I couldn't get off that mat. And that's when I surrendered. And I said, Lord, if you'll have me, I want to do this. And the irony is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is the only highlighted in my son's Bible. I always looked at those, and they're like, Connor, what are you trying to tell me? When I surrendered that day to the Lord, he was like, I can work with this. Yeah. I got you. And literally, Nana, I've been in the closet with you all along. And I cannot tell you, Mercy, what a grace, what a mercy. And I've been clean ever since. And I'm not looking back. And he is my defender. I was like, he's my rock. And I don't now know how to do this grief journey without.
Well, it's just amazing to me to even hear that. No, I didn't know, obviously, any of this when I asked you. And you said yes. And then then you listened to your episode, and then you said, we need to talk. We need to talk. And I was like, what do we have to talk about? Does she not want to really do this? Is what?
No.
Happening. But it was that, I think you just kind of realized, like, you don't know the real me. The real me was not the person that was there that day. And when I listened to it again, I listened to it in a different way because now I do.
I'm sure.
Because honestly, you seem so together. And I think it's such an amazing point, though, that you can't tell from the outside how someone is, right? Mm-hmm. And as I listen to you, because I'm listening to this episode now, yesterday or 2 days ago, I was listening to your episode, and I knew what was really going on at the time. And then
I heard us say the date. And then I was like, wow, that wasn't me either. That wasn't how I was either. Because, I mean, you could kind of sense it because I just started sobbing like crazy. But like, I was so incredibly low then. And yet I was still trying to be an inspiration. I mean, we both were in some ways, but I could. But I think there was a good amount of denial maybe for both of us at the time.
One of the things I'd like to say about both of you is that, Marcy, you have continued to be open and vulnerable and honest. And that's what makes you so relatable because you're so authentic. What Nan just did with bringing us into her closet and telling us where she was, just did that for other people in a very, very big way. There is someone in the closet tonight that will listen that needs to hear that. And so for you, showing us who you really were, you didn't have to do this. And so, and we don't know. And I just know that when you get to heaven, someone's going to walk beside you and say, I listened to your story and you helped so much, because that turned my life around. And we were going to save the comments till the end, but someone has written a comment in the chat. Someone named Libby says, Nan Deal is my inspiration and strength.
Libby, keep going. Yeah, you know, I have told many people in my testimony now in the last 4 years that I will spend the rest of my days telling people, and not whether you have a loss or not, that how good God is.
Awesome.
How good he is, and he can be trusted. And I think, you know, that's the thing. I listened to that woman and I wasn't lamenting. I'm still asking why, and why me, and throwing the temper tantrum, and then at night medicating the temper tantrum because it was just, I couldn't handle the pain. And you know, when you surrender, you truly surrender and you trust, and you admit that, God, I can't do this without you. And I can't. I wake up every day and I say, I cannot do this without you. I can't have this grandson without you. And him not know Connor. And he's like, I see you and I've got you back. And I believe that. I believe that he has my back. And so I know because every time now that I am honest, there's so many other moms and dads out there, literally in the closet or their car or wherever. And it truly is a false way of numbing of dealing with the pain. And the enemy, oh my goodness, he wanted nothing more. And I think about what God is allowing me to do now, like this and other things, and they're just for his glory and not mine. They're for him. And I'm grateful for the opportunity because I want to help, but I want to shout how good God is. I mean, think about that. He watched me be a prodigal for a decade, and he met me with such grace and mercy. And yet he was the same grace and mercy. He walked me out of that hospital that day when Connor took his last breath.
Well, and I love you talking about trust, because that is always what I work on too, is trying to feel that trust, because that is, I think, the hardest thing to kind of get back on all of it. And that is such a common prayer for me, is help me trust. Well, thank you much for talking here, and I'm going to have Demetra come on here, and then we'll allow for some questions afterwards. So I'm going to put Demetra on and take Nan off. And welcome, Demi. I'm saying your name properly. So glad to have you join us on the stage now. You did your interview about your sweet Eleni. You were only 7 months out after her death. Also, that's when our relationship was super, super fresh. And like, I didn't know you that well. And now I've only met you once in person, but we message quite a lot. And I feel like I know you so well. So I'm so glad to have you No, because you were in episode 94, 92. So it does give us a little bit of a different glimpse in things, but it also is another one that was really fresh and early. Mm-hmm. Now you're a ways out. So I thought you're another good person to kind of see what has happened, what has changed, in your life compared to when you came on 7 months out.
Right. It's at 7 months out, I don't even remember what I said.
Yeah.
I think I was numb still until the first year was over. And then that's kind of reality set in, right? Like you keep waking up every day thinking, how can this be my life? No, something's wrong. Like that can't be what happened, right? So I think it's all the shock and the trauma that we experienced during the first, I had 4.5 years with Eleni with her illness, right?
Yeah.
So she was at Sick Kids in Toronto here. We went through a lot. We progressively saw her getting worse. But you're in denial, right? You don't want to see, reality. And I could see it, but I couldn't see this being an outcome, right? We always fight for our children. And we always try to help them as much as we can. So I think, my son now, it's been almost 4 years. October 12th will be 4 years. I can't believe it's been 4 years. Like some days, yes, it seems like yesterday. Some days it seems like just like a lifetime ago. I went to work quite quickly afterwards. I work with kids with disabilities. And I went to work about 4 months after because being alone at home was not good for me. Mm-hmm. There's too many reminders. There was too many, memories that we had. So I just felt I had to keep my mind a little bit deep. But going back to school where you see children in and you see children with C2s and you see tracheostomies, it's kind of really hard because then you kind of wonder, well, why is that child alive and my child, my child seemed healthier. Like they didn't have all those things going. Yes, she had oxygen at the end for a couple of years. She wasn't in pain. She was a happy-go-lucky girl. She loved her arts and crafts. We would do everything together. And then the first hospital visit was hard because we had to, she wasn't able to walk afterwards so far because of her lung capacity, right? And the oxygen level dropped. It was very hard. And it was hard to see the differences and the changes. Now we're 4 years in. I used to put her grave spot every day. About the third year is when I kind of slowed down because my mom got sick. She had been sick for a little while. We didn't really know what it was. In December 4th, she was diagnosed with cancer, and there was nothing really they could do. So we lost her on Christmas Day, Thanksgiving Day that I really love, and Christmas Day that I don't really love. But that's okay. Maybe they chose those days, right? But with my mom, we were able to get her into hospice for 4 days, and I just felt in control, and I was able to help my dad through that. Mm-hmm. Which with Eleni control, when you're in the hospital for 2.5 months, the doctors pretty much tell you what to do and what needs to get done, and you kind of have to go along with it, even if you don't want to sometimes. Life kind of goes on, and my son now, Dean, was 15 at the time. He's now 19. He is studying and doing his apprenticeship for an auto mechanic. He's got a full-time job. He's my life. We all miss Eleni so much. We just keep going for her, I guess, right? But he makes me proud, and he also scares me because, this weekend, he decided with his buddies to go up north for 2 days. And that's hard, right? You got to let go, somehow, right? I know, Marcy, you get that with Peter right now, letting him go a little bit. It's definitely hard. But this is kind of another stage of our life, I guess, right?
Right. Well, and the one thing I wanted to touch base with you about a little bit is how it is really nice if you can have someone in your life that you can really turn to and be open with about some things that you might not want to talk about with somebody else. You have been that in many ways to me. I think I'm that somewhat to you. Also, I know your friend Marge, who's going to be on the podcast. She's that to you as well. And I did want to bring that up, that when you are in the grief journey, it's so nice if you can have somebody. A lot of times it is another griever, someone that you can just maybe bounce some things off that you don't feel comfortable doing. So I'm just going to give one little example of something that just happened. And different people can hold different roles in your life. And some come in for a season and some stay the long run, right? Finding support groups, finding people is just so, so beneficial. And here, Demetra lives in Toronto. I'm here in Michigan. And the other day, it was the day before that the anniversary of Andy's death. And we went to go see the movie Deadpool, the Deadpool Wolverine movie, if any of you have seen it. It's, it's supposed to be kind of funny in that Deadpool and Wolverine are both characters that cannot be killed. So no matter how much they're stabbed or shot or whatever happens, they still survive. Anyway, they decided to have this very funny scene in a minivan where they were like fighting each other and literally like stabbing each other, and they would always just regenerate and be fine. And the minivan gets all like bloody, and it's supposed to be funny because, it's a minivan with suburban minivan, like a mom car, and all of this violence is happening in it. Well, the interior of this Honda Odyssey is the exact interior of our van. And I find myself almost unable to breathe in there. I look at Eric. He looks totally fine. We're with another friend. I'm just thinking to myself, don't look, don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. All I can think about is the fact that Andy's blood was in our minivan. I'm like not doing well. And I go to bed that night. All I'm seeing is the blood in the minivan. We traveled up north like 2 days later. I'm going past the accident site. I'm seeing that stupid minivan from the movie. All this stuff is happening, and I'm told no one. And then I got to the point where I was brave enough to reach out to one person, and it was Demetra, because I just text her. I don't ever even call her, nothing. I'm like, I'm going to just look this out there and see what she says. And you were so, so sweet, and you encouraged me to tell Eric, which I wouldn't have had the courage to do otherwise, which I did. And it was really helpful. He had, of course, not thought any of those things that I was thinking. But after getting that out, it really did help me. And I just wanted to share that story. First of all, thank you for that. But secondly, to let people know that, find yourself a Dini, find yourself someone that you can kind of do that with. It's so funny because Chrisy and I are also in a huge chat. And I thought about putting it in the huge chat, and I was like, I cannot put this out to 12 people. I just cannot. I can put this out to one person. And then, then you carefully decide who's that maybe person that I can do that with. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of share that a little bit to be an encouragement to others. Oh, and Mark said, I have my Dini because you are her Dini. We share you.
Listen, we
all be jealous of each other, but yes.
We're all connected, all been through the worst. I find sometimes when you just keep it in your head, it's easy for me to give advice, but sometimes to take my own advice is hard. Yeah. Because communicating with my husband sometimes is very difficult as well. And I just have conversations, but I think letting it out of your head to a person that you can trust, because I know you and Eric have wonderful communication, and he's very understanding and compassionate. I knew he would take it with a different, like we couldn't get into somebody else's head. So you know how Eric is going to respond, right? And you don't think you understood. I was even thinking maybe he didn't even get it, right? That you were feeling that way.
Oh, no, and he didn't. He didn't at all. He was like, our minivan wasn't blue. Like, okay. You're right, our minivan wasn't blue, but the inside looked exactly the same. How did you not see that? Like, I didn't even remember what the inside of our minivan looked like. Okay, fine. But anyway, it just was helpful. It just was helpful. Any comments you have here, Gwen?
No, I just love someone else Melissa wrote, I also have my Lisa. So,
yes.
Just naming our people that we can talk to.
Right. I think that's what I really wanted to get to here is that naming your people. And I don't just have Demetra, I have so many people. Yeah. And I have new people that come into the support group and new people that I have met along this journey who are just amazing, wonderful supports for me. And I hope I can be amazing supports for them as well. I'm going to let people back in. But as I let people back in, Gwen, I would like you to read something that Michelle sent in, if that's okay.
She said, how do I put into words what the podcast has meant to me over the last 4 years? It's been just over 4 years since I lost Corbin. I was lost and just did not know what to do. I kept saying, I just don't know what to do. What do I do now? ? I desperately searched for connection with others who could possibly understand this heartache and desperation and pain. I knew I needed that. Corbin was my only child and I felt so alone. I searched podcasts, which I had not really listened to any before. When I found your podcast, Marcy, it was like a lifeline. And then I liked the fact that you were only an hour from me, so you felt someone local. I needed something to grab onto and feel connected. The very first episode I listened to was episode 43 on finding encouragement with both you and Gwen. I know this because I messaged you on February or on Facebook on 7/20/2020 stating it and how comforting it was to me. Corbin had just died a few weeks before on that July 4th. In those early days, I began a routine of sitting out on my deck and listening to your podcast, catching up, and feeling just slightly less alone as I felt connected to you and others on your podcast. It was then through your podcast, I heard about Starlight and I attended the Mom's Retreat in August. Later, that led me to joining the virtual group, and that following year, you were facilitating. And that program provided such support and ultimately dear connections with other moms and continued friendships. We bonded. We stand in the gap together. I'm so thankful for that. So many times over the years when I listened, I shake my head and nod in agreement and even saying yes out loud to myself. Marcy, I'm so grateful for you that you had the bravery and courage to keep going with the podcast, as well as all the other parents who have shared their story. You have created community, connection, resources, relationships, and more. Our world feels so small in grief, but you've helped make it feel bigger to me, if that makes sense. When I liked your image, the image that you mentioned in episode 43, the idea that the world should have a parade for bereaved parents, because we are doing it. We're getting up each day. And Marcy, you are doing it. You're showing up for yourself, for Andy and others. And your podcast has helped me on the journey to be able to help and support other bereaved moms. It's healing for me and encourages me to be a support to others, which is what you have done also for so many. I never imagined I'd be brave enough to be on your podcast, yet I did it earlier this year for episode 237. It was so special, and I can't thank you enough for allowing me to share my Corbin. Thank you for all you do in sharing your heart and platform to share for others to share theirs. With love, Corbin's mom forever, Michelle. I love that because we couldn't have everybody on, but I happened to be Facebook friends with Michelle, and I saw something that she had done. And we were asking people, like, what is your change? You know, what areas of growth have you seen? For Michelle, she, took a class and became a certified grief specialist. And I just saw she posted that she's going to be hosting a support group for bereaved moms in her area. And just, that is so awesome that now she's at the point that she's doing that for others. I just love it. It's full circle.
It is. And I'm so glad she just wrote that email today, because we had talked about, we almost should try to talk about Michelle and how Michelle has become a certified grief educator. And that has been, we've watched her go through this from starting to listen to the podcast 2 weeks in to going to the women's retreat or the mom's retreat to attending Starlight for the full 2-year curriculum to all of this, right? We've seen all of this happen, but yet we're like, should we do that? Right in, whatever. And then she did. So here's my eyes when I even read it today. And then we were texting back and forth. It just is beautiful.
Yeah.
When I see such growth through this devastation, beauty is coming of it, right?
Yeah.
What she's doing now isn't beautiful.
One other comment that came in was when Chrisy was talking about, just that podcast listening and you felt heard and understood and you had hope and possibility and that you were able to get out of bed. I just want you to know that somebody else wrote, Lisa wrote in all capital letters, this. This is why, this is what matters. So I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I know. I saw that too. And that was beautiful. So I don't know if anybody has any questions that might be listening live, or if people had other comments who were on kind of earlier. We haven't heard from Stephanie and Chrisy since the very, very beginning. So, comments on other people's stories, comments on what you kind of heard today.
I really enjoyed hearing Nan share. I've heard your story on the podcast, and was just in awe of how you have come on the other side of all that pain. And just, it's just an amazing testimony. It's a very painful one. And I think any of us who are walking in this painful journey can find ourselves in that place any day. And that's scary. But I'm so thankful to see how well you're doing and how you're giving all the glory to the Lord. And just you're sharing your story. And you really encouraged me today. So.
Oh, thank you. God is good all the time, right?
Yeah. It's hard to see in the beginning, but he definitely is, yes.
I just wanted to say too, I remember being in that first year and a half or 2 years, and I remember hearing people who were 7 years, 16 years, 5 years, 4 years, who could look and see some beauty in those ashes. And I remember it didn't make sense to me, right? And so I also want to say to people who are listening, if this is hard to listen to, I get that. I was mad the first time somebody told me there will be positive outcome. There will be beauty. You can be a better version of yourself. I was so angry at all of that. Yeah, like these other women who spoke tonight, we can all say what we wouldn't give to have our children back. But there is beauty, and it's hard. So if that's you tonight, hold on. Just hold on.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I'm
Well
so
said.
glad you said that. And because when Marcy was talking just now about Michelle's story and saying it's just beautiful, I had the memory that I'm trying to look what episode it was when we did an episode on meaning making. And Marcy, that was a little upsetting to you. It was episode 90. Remember, you were struggling with that. Like, I hate this. We don't want good to come. We're not, and 90, it was hard to see some of that beauty. And so I'm so glad you said that, Stephanie, to encourage.
And that was 3 years into my journey.
Yeah.
And what's funny is the very first episode we had, you talked about seeing growth in me, and you talked a lot about what Stephanie just said, and then you said, but I never would have told you that the first time I met you, and and you started to say because, and then I said because I never would have come back, and that's the thing, right? I never would have come back if you would have led with this is going to make you a more beautiful, compassionate person. This ultimately. You will be able to still praise God and still be strong in your faith through this. If you would have led with that, I would have been like, okay, I thought I wanted this. I don't think so. I'm not coming back. That's not where you started with. This is painful and this is hard, but we're here, and God's here, and we're all in it. We're all in it, and it's messy and it's hard. And you just let us sit in that room in Starlight on that couch. And I sat holding Andy's teddy bear and just cried. And you just let me. So if tonight all you're doing is sitting and crying while you're listening, that's okay. Because we were all there. We were all sitting and crying and wondering just why.
Yes.
And, you can ultimately get to a point where that's not where you are.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, that you are. And it's okay if you are for a long time. I love how Stephanie said today that she was CEO of her grief for the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And can it be both? I mean, I think both are there.
Yeah.
There is joy and there is sorrow. And yet if you're that person, that sorrow is here.
Yeah.
And joy is down here going, but I had that child that, the pain is so intense at 18 months in, and I'd really like to be done. And then you get into the season where you're like, man, I'm so glad I'm still here because I got a grandson coming. And yet, Connor, I want him to know you. I want him to hold you. It is both.
Right.
We sometimes go, it's all grief, and then I'll get to the joy. Is both. They don't cancel one another out. And that's what we learn to live with and hand to the Lord. And I mean, that's what the Psalms are. They start off with, do you see me? Do you hear me? And yet I will remember your faithfulness. It truly is both. That yet you could be riding on one rail really hard for a long time. Mm-hmm. And yet you could be like me and you're almost 16 years in and you see some joys and you can embrace them. And yet that sorrow is still bumping up against it all the time.
I mean, I love how we can feel so many things at the same time. I love that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I love Stephanie's quote about being the CEO. Wow. Wow. I'm like, that is exactly what I did those first 2 years. I love that.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. It was a pleasure to do this with you. And I look forward to continuing relationship with you and, building new relationships with other listeners over these next 5 years. And, maybe we have a whole new batch on at that 10-year mark. Who knows? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful and would like to support the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and comment. To help financially, you can type Andy's Mom, one word, to the number 53555. This provides a link to GiveButter, which allows donations through PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, or credit cards. GiveButter will provide a receipt of your tax-deductible donation, or you can visit the donation page at andysmom.com/donate. Always Andy's Mom is a registered 501c3 and can receive donations through Thrivent Financial and Benevity. Marcy loves hearing from listeners. Please feel free to reach out to her via email at marcy@andysmom.com or on the Instagram or Facebook Always Andy's Mom accounts. Sign up for the email list to get weekly episode links as well as pictures of Marcy's guests and their children. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.